I don't feel like there's a hit on the album.
I think it's because like there's only a certain amount of Quavo and Takeoff flows in the arsenal. That was one of our reactions to Quavo and Takeoff's new album, Only Built for Infiniti Links. If you guys want to check the full live stream, link in description. But let's get into this, man, all right? So it's been a minute. We've been waiting for this album, and the question going into this new studio album from Quavo and Takeoff was, were they going to be able to carry a full track list without Offset? So let's dive into the artist performance. Where do you think they strived, and where do you think they could improve for the next time?
I think that they definitely had some chemistry, and it was super cool to see that it's not like they took on their assigned roles in the sense of Quavo taking all the hooks, Takeoff,
that was refreshing,
being more focused on the verses. It was cool to see more of a balance on this track list. I think that they do have some chemistry in terms of a song like Tony Stark's where they both give a hook and it's kind of a shared hook. That was cool. Then you also have a song like Not Out where they transition verses in a really cool way where Quavo asks him a question. He asks Takeoff, how many bags do we got?
Yeah.
And then he replies with like, I don't know how many bags we got. Like to see like that call and response, that was something that was cool on that track, but I would have liked to have seen more of it throughout the entire track list. And I think that that's kind of a nitpick that I have with a lot of collaboration tracks where nobody utilizes that call and response type of style. But relating back to this album, I thought the performances weren't as impressive as they could have been, especially when you're going through that second half of the track list, because obviously the album does start off on a strong note, but once you reach track 9, it takes a big fucking dip.
It does take a big fucking dip.
Yeah.
And I think that it's just a problem maybe of like, Quavo and Takeoff not being able to carry an hour-long track list.
But Takeoff has carried his own track list on his own. It's the two of them.
I know, but even at that, it wasn't too great, And like going on to, Only Built for Infiniti Links, I find there's major pacing issues because of the performances. They become too stagnant at a certain point. Because, yes, I do agree with you. I think that Takeoff and Quavo are super talented rappers, and they've been doing this for years, and they have a catalog full of great performances, from Quavo's melodic and crazy, auto-tune crooning and, him on hooks, and then, the vicious verses that Takeoff puts down maybe on something like Motorsport. But I find like when it's only them two, especially if there's not too many features on this track list, it kind of gets boring as you get through the second half of that track list, as you said. Plus, when you want to talk about artist performance, I want to talk about Quavo because there's some really bad performances from him.
His hook on Big Stunna?
My goodness, listen, I think that's the worst hook I've ever heard him, lay down on a track. And it's crazy because he's one of the best hookmen in the game. Like
he was at one point.
You could really talk about that. And there's still great hooks on this, throughout the track list. I just think that when you're, kind of providing that type of quality within the track list kind of gets a bit shady.
I think that the flows and the cadences really get stale at a certain point. And what's crazy to me is that it's like once they get past their uniform style, once they're trying out flows, let's say kind of borrowing flows from other artists, that's kind of when they're striving. For example, when Takeoff used the same bridge flow that Andre 3000 had on So Fresh, So Clean.
Yeah.
That was one of his best performances on the album. Same thing with Quavo when he's rapping with that YB flow on the song that YB was featured on.
Yeah, to the bone, yeah.
Again, one of his most energetic performances on the entire album.
And that was for the chorus, yeah. And I think that you could also argue that, like, they needed Offset, bro, low-key. Like, Offset would have been able to provide so much relief for them on certain tracks because, again, a lot of tracks on this album, they're lengthy, dude. And, like, you're there, you're sitting, and you're like, okay, I kind of heard this verse on the previous 2 tracks that I've already been on. And
yeah.
It's like didn't really switch anything up from previous material that they've done before, and like the production choices that they actually were able to rap on weren't too ballsy as well. So like you didn't see them kind of experiment with anything too new or too fresh.
I kind of disagree with that. I think there was definitely some different productions that they brought in, but we'll get into that a bit later. But in terms of the artist performance, I think it's safe to say that it was mid. It was definitely average or below average. And to be honest with you, even a song like 230 where Quavo is trying those high-pitch inflections that remind you of Future, it just seems like it's too far out of his element, and overall kind of leaves a bit of a sour taste in your mouth. But let's get into the features for this track list. We had 6 total. We had NBA Youngboy, we had Young Thug, we had Gunna, Summer Walker, Birdman, and Gucci Mane. What do you think is the best and worst on here?
Okay, best feature, I'd probably have to give it to Gunna on Chocolate. I think that's my
Fire.
favorite. Yeah, I believe he had the 4th verse on there.
Yeah, he slid on that.
Yeah, and my least favorite, probably Birdman, bro, on Big Stunna. That was really not too great. I mean, you're maybe getting 6 lines in total from him, and then he catches this, like, high school-like flow towards the end of his verse, and I'm like, this is not really needed.
He has a line.
Yeah, go for it.
Where he says, hold on a sec, lead actress, bitch, please, you know who I be. And that's not being taken out of context. That's just what the line is, and it's repeated twice. And all 5 or 6 of his lines are just nonsensical. And yeah, as soon as I saw Birdman featured, I knew it probably wouldn't be that great of a verse. In terms of the Gunna and Young Thug song, I think that was definitely a highlight on Chocolate. I think that it was crazy to see that the YSL boys kind of took over that song completely and ended up bodying Quavo and Takeoff, in my opinion. And that just goes to show that, again, they're choosing at times beats that aren't even really catered towards their own strengths.
Yeah, and then I want to go on to something like Mixie with Summer Walker, and I'm a fan of Summer Walker's music. She has a beautiful voice, and she's always providing these beautiful performances whenever she's able to hop on a track. I just don't think it was prominent here. I'm being honest with you. She had the second verse on here, and it's just kind of like lazy writing to a certain extent. Get this. I've been on a wave. I'm lit. I'm rich. Love it how you stack your Cubans up. That's drip. And like she's using this kind of glitchy flow where like she'll go towards like 90% of the line and then she just takes like this really awkward pause and then she finishes it off. And
yeah,
I didn't like that for the vibe of the song. And listen, she has a beautiful voice. I just didn't like the feature as a whole.
Absolutely.
But how did you feel about NBA Youngboy? Because they usually have great chemistry together, especially with the Migos. And I just didn't like the way he started off his verse, but he caught a nice flow towards the end of it.
He did kind of make up for it towards the end. I definitely think that the performance was all right. I mean, when it comes down to this performance, delivery was pretty slurred. It was kind of hard because for me, like his rhythm wasn't moving me. Obviously, his words weren't moving me because I couldn't make out much of what he said. But I do think that it did add something to that track, especially once again because that song was catered more towards YB than it was towards Quavo and Takeoff, which is a big narrative for this whole album.
Yeah,
really.
That's true. But okay, let's get on to Gucci Mane on Us versus Them. Nothing too impressive on my part. You're getting a substandard Gucci Mane verse in 2022, but he always shows up. You know, it's nothing.
Yeah, it wasn't bad.
And it wasn't bad whatsoever. It's standard Gucci Mane that you're gonna get on most of his track lists or most of his feature runs. So, how do you feel about the features overall, bro?
Overall, I think that they were good, kind of in the middle of mid and good, but because of the decent enough performances from Gucci and Youngboy, and then the great performances from Thug and Gunna, I think it's fair to say that they were good. Even when I kind of like saw that track list from the get go, it didn't really get me that excited when I saw the names.
Who would you have liked
artists.
to see on this track list? Maybe to provide some relief, especially towards the second half.
I think Travis Scott could have made the track list.
Absolutely.
There was a beat that was super triumphant that I thought Drake would have been really well suited for. And Offset. Offset's the biggest fucking name that I'll keep bringing up just because this album felt like a Migos album without Offset.
That's very true. Okay, but let's get into the production because big standouts for a lot of different Migos albums is this crazy, cast of producers that they're able to bring together, especially within the trap lane, to create these super energetic and fun soundscapes. And I feel like that was somewhat prominent within this track list. It was super fun to a certain extent. It's just that I don't find there was much of a switch up from other stuff that they'd bring in on, like, let's say, old culture albums or even from, the YRN series. So how did you feel about the soundscape? You're getting, producers like Mustard, let's say DJ Darrell on here. You're
Buddha
getting
Bless.
Murda. You're getting Buddha Bless. So how did you feel about the overall soundscape?
There's way too many fucking flutes and recorders and just woodwind instruments to begin with, bro. And it's like those are present on maybe 7 songs. It becomes really tiresome. It feels like just a cheap sonic thrill that they're chasing throughout the track list. But overall, the production is decent enough, especially when you're looking at that first half of the track list.
Facts.
Starting off with the intro to Infiniti Links was super dope to hear them rapping over the soul sample that felt like it was a combination of a beat from Buddha Bless and maybe the RZA. That was pretty cool to see them take on that kind of beat. Obviously, a huge standout is going to be when Buddha Bless actually sampled Outkast So Fresh, So Clean. I thought that was a great flip, and it was cool to see them pay homage to fellow Atlanta legends. Apart from that, another beat that I liked a lot was See Bout It.
Yeah,
that was the Mustard beat, right?
That was the Mustard beat that had a lot of triumphant energy to it with all the horns and everything. And I think that's going to be a good club banger. We were talking about that on the stream yesterday. If you guys want to access it, link in the description. But what was cool about that, too, is you were saying, imagine Drake was on this. Imagine, the party banger that could have been. And another one that I liked, too, was Bars into Captions. That sounded like something that you might have found off of something like Honcho Jack Honcho. You have this kind of haunting guitar riff that sounds very rustic. And I find they do well well on it, and they provide a very good performance throughout it. But I find that, like you were saying, you're getting too many flutes and recorders throughout the track list. So like once you start getting towards the second half, it's like, geez, okay, I kind of want to take my headphones off at this point. But do you have any production standouts once you start getting into that second half?
Into the second half, there's not really that much. I mean, I do love overall, I would say on the track list, the more rustic and twangy guitar strings that come from these acoustic guitars on songs like Hotel Lobby or on songs like Chocolate. I thought those were really well implemented. But yeah, I just feel like not only the performances, but also the production took a major dip towards the end of the track list. I didn't like the fact that they brought in these orchestral elements where they had these violins and these grand pianos ringing off, but it didn't seem like it was well suited, again, to their strength. So overall, just because of, I would say, those early standouts, and also the fact that the production overall remained consistent, even though it was kind of generic towards the latter half, I think it was still good.
Yeah, it was definitely a good soundscape. You're not going to find that many cheap beats on it. Like it's pretty standard. Like you have a good cast of producers on here, so it's going to be enjoyable for that. But let's get on to the replay value, bro, because I haven't been sitting with Culture 3 all that much, to be honest with you. If you want to ask me what I do revisit from, let's say, Quavo, Takeoff, Offset, Migos as a whole, it's always stuff like Without Warning or Father of Four. It's the original Culture, the YRN series. So how do you feel about Only Built for Infiniti Links? Like, do you think that this is going to stick through your rotation, at least from a trap play? And how do you feel about that major dip off in the second half of the album?
Absolutely not. I think that a major issue with this track list is just the actual timing, and the sense that they're giving you so many hooks throughout one song, and obviously pacing issues are a big problem with this album. But in terms of what I'm actually going to be taking out, To Infiniti Links was good. Hotel Lobby,
Tony
Bars
Starks.
into Captions, See Bout It was decent enough. Chocolate, I guess. Maybe Nothing Changed. Messy was decent too. I probably have a good 7 or 8 songs at the most.
At the most
So
on
I'm
here,
being
yeah.
fucking generous, bro. But I hate to say it, but I could really see this whole track list just becoming a distant memory for me in the near future.
Yeah, I feel that same way, but I'm going to tell you some songs that I'm going to take out of it. To Infiniti Links for sure. Tony Starks was good. Hotel Lobby, Bars into Captions. I want to take out Not Out. That was a great song for me.
Yeah.
I'm going to take Not Out, and maybe Chocolate. It's just like, am I going to revisit that only for 2 verses?
You got to
from
skip
Young
to the
Thug?
2-minute mark.
Exactly,
You know?
and I don't really like that when it comes to going back to songs. And again, like you were saying, major pacing issues for me. I was in the stream yesterday, and once I had gotten, I believe it was to Big Stunna, which is whoa, this album has to do something, and I think it's a product of certain trap albums coming out in 2022, where you're going to see the majority of the stronger material coming out towards the first half of the album. But even at that, is the first half of the album even that great to be able to carry you throughout the rest of the track list?
Not really.
I think it's good, but overall, I think the replay value on this is going to be mid for me, bro.
It will be.
I'm not going to revisit all that much. Like you said, you're max taking 6 to 7 tracks out of an hour and 18 track album. So what is there really to get out of this?
There's not much, but let's get into our overall thoughts. So like I was saying earlier, this album felt like a 3-hour fucking listen, not only on the first listen, but on the second and third. It really just felt like I was there for the longest time, and kind of just a dreadful experience going through the entirety of the project. I think that when you're looking at Quavo and Takeoff's performances, they come to a point maybe around track 9 or 10 where it seems like they've exhausted all of their flows and cadences already, and you're just left wondering how much do they have left in the tank? How can they actually go forward with future albums if this is what it's going to be like in terms of the repetitive nature of not only the lyrics, but also the performances? Production was pretty solid throughout. I mean, they have great producers at their disposal, and it definitely was shown here, even though their beat selection overall wasn't fantastic all throughout. And yeah, the way that I feel about it is that, like I said earlier, it feels like a Migos album without Offset, and it's just another mediocre trap album in a year filled with mediocre trap albums.
Sheesh. Okay, that's definite.
It's harsh, bro, but that's how I
review.
feel. That's my opinion.
For sure. And I'm kind of on that same page, to be honest with you. And I think that they have a hard time carrying a long track list. If they want to go again, I think from a fan's perspective,
10 songs,
bro. 10 to 12 songs from a fan and consumer perspective. Obviously, they do what they want, and it's up to them on how they format their albums. But just from an experience standpoint, it really got dreadful towards the later half of this track list. And as you were saying, on the second and third listen, I even bumped this album in the car. I tried to get it on my car speakers. It wasn't anything too crazy because you felt like you've gotten these verses already from previous Migos albums. And Offset is a main component in keeping their performances interesting because he provides this ability of versatility, and it was something I was missing on this album. You needed a guy to be able to take on some extra hooks from Quavo while being able to murder some extra verses that maybe Takeoff took on. So overall, I think that the project is mid. I don't like to say the word mid anymore just because I feel like it's getting memed out, but it was just average or below average. You're not going to get anything
definitely
too
a
great out of it.
subpar album that I feel like didn't add too many layers to the Migos canon. It didn't add I feel like the two of them as a duo, they didn't really show extra personality.
At least we have culture.
Yeah, we have culture to go back to, but I'm saying I'm a bit concerned for the duo itself. I hope that, they can bounce back from this and come back with some heat. But guys, let us know down in the comments, what do you think of this album? What would you rate it based on our scoring system? And as we mentioned earlier, if you do want to check out our live album reaction, which was a great time last night on Patreon, check out the link in our description. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.